One of the most intriguing and enduring legends passed down through generations of the natives in the Solomon Islands is that of monstrous giants. Tradition has it that these huge creatures live in caves and inhabit underground spaces that connect the islands. Depending on who you ask, some people think the giants are good, others think they are evil and dangerous, with stories about these giants hunting, killing, and even eating people. For a long time, this was thought of as stories, but after much research from multiple people, these stories are starting to show signs of truth. The Solomon Islands have a long and interesting history going back hundreds of years. According to legend or history, King Solomon of Israel sent his trade ships all over the world to find the most valuable goods. The wealth of King Solomon is something that existed and was documented not just in the Bible, but in other literary works, and a lot of people coveted the wealth spoken about by King Solomon. The Spanish explorers during the Age of Exploration knew a lot about this history from the Bible and used it as a map, following the same trade paths and stories that were written in old Jewish texts. The islands were finally found by a Spanish explorer named Alvaro de Mendaña de Neira in 1568. He sailed the seas from Peru and came across these beautiful, untouched islands. Mendaña was sure he had found the spot where King Solomon got the gold for his temple in Jerusalem, and named the islands the Solomon Islands in honor of King Solomon. The rumors about the vast riches went viral for hundreds of years, and people from all over the world set out to find out about this island's claimed gold deposits. However, Mendaña's claims of finding gold have never been proven, but modern companies have been able to excavate a lot of gold from the same islands that Mendaña explored. This led many people to think that maybe he was right, and there could still be a large amount of it, still buried somewhere in the earth, waiting to be found. But weirdly enough, that is not what the Solomon Islands are famous for. Instead, the Solomon Islands is known as the very location where giants live. According to some witness accounts and descriptions, these giants were 10 feet tall, and some say they could get even bigger. Their hair is very long, usually in black, brown, or reddish color. Their eyes were red, faces were flat, and their mouths were big. Even though they look like mindless, monstrous animals, some say that the giants are actually intelligent and have their own societies and social systems. The natives believe that there may be thousands of them living on the island, using complex cave networks to move around. Now, I know this sounds odd and weird to you watching this video, because giants are, well, giants. They can't be that easy to hide, especially 1,000 of them. But here's the thing. The Solomon Islands is just one out of numerous different locations, tribes, and cultures that talk about giants. In Nevada, which is miles upon miles away from the Solomon Islands, there are stories of the Sitka from the Paiute Indians who lived in the area. They told of red-haired men and women as tall as 12 feet who originally lived in the area when the Paiutes had first arrived. These giants, unfortunately, were not friendly and preferred eating people to animals, so you could say they had a problem making friends. The Indian tribes had to set aside whatever differences they had and came together to attack the giants. They successfully killed most of them. The giants that were still alive ran into a cave for refuge. The Indians, seeing that, the giants were cornered, piled brush into the cave, and set it on fire. Any giants that did run out were shot with arrows. The remaining giants died of asphyxiation. The cave where the giants went into hiding was known as Horseshoe Cave, but you might be familiar with its current name, Lovelock Cave. Lovelock Cave is located around 20 miles south of Lovelock, Nevada, and inside the cave, archaeologists have found supersized human skulls, 15-inch sandals, and massive handprints that have all been uncovered in various excavations over the last century, which have continued to spark the curiosity of scientists and the public. What is striking in that story is the similarities in the description of what the giants looked like and the way they behave, matching the stories from the people of the Solomon Islands. Unlike in the US, when any case or whisper of something extraordinary is mentioned, it is immediately covered in layers of lies, denial, and sometimes a threat to life. The country Peru is quite different and showcases their findings to the public. In Peru's history, the Incas had kings who were huge and had hair that was both red and blonde. In the Gold Museum in Lima, you can still see the clothing and head of an Incan king, with heights reaching 10 feet. His preserved and dried head is about twice as big as mine or any human. Again, unlike the US, everywhere you go in Peru, there are giant skulls and skeletons. Many of the skulls are not normal looking either. And no, they are not all millions of years old, as most people would think. In most cases, these remains are just hundreds of years old. There are numerous, and I mean numerous stories and images showing that giants existed, like the 64-pound sledgehammer that was found in a copper mine in North Wales that is 3,500 years old. Giant axes, swords, and other weapons have been found in Iran. Giants' remains have also been found in Arizona, California, Ohio, Peru, the Solomon Islands, and so much more. But none of that tops the one person who claimed he witnessed it and lived to tell the tale with proofs. Marius Boirayon worked as an aircraft and helicopter engineer in outback Australia and was even in the Royal Australian Air Force. In 1995, he made up his mind to leave Australia and move to the Solomon Islands to live there. Marius lived and worked in the Solomon Islands as a helicopter pilot and engineer. He loved the culture, the folklore, and everything about the country, so much that he married a native. He was in a way part of the tribe. After a while, he started hearing stories about giants living in the area. At first, he thought they were just stories or part of some folklore, but the more he interacted with the natives, the more he saw that this wasn't just a story to them. It felt like they were discussing history. Just like how Americans talk about the founding fathers and Russians about Catherine the Great, these natives were talking about giants like it was a part and parcel of their civilization. Marius's curiosity grew, and he started interviewing them, collecting their statements, and in some rare cases, actual witness accounts of people who saw giants. He compiled all the information he had gotten and wrote a book about everything, titled Solomon Island Mysteries Adventures. He went into detail about every piece of information he collected, even talked about witnessing a UFO event right there in the Solomon Islands, and a one world order in which his country, Australia, is part of. Now, before I move on, I want to remind you that this was before the age of the internet. The internet wasn't as interconnected as we have it right now. Information wasn't as easily accessible as you might want. Not to talk of the Solomon Islands, where the internet was on the bottom list of the government priorities. I say this because the natives described the giants that were part of their history as ones that are over 10 feet tall, with long black, brown, or reddish hair, which coincides with the description of giants from other cultures. Their culture could not have been easily influenced by the internet or hearsay, that they would make up the same description as other cultures. In such, the islanders couldn't fathom that the giant's existence was a huge discovery to the rest of the world. To them, it was nothing, just a part of their lives. One story that stood out from Marius's book was the story of a woman named Mango. According to the story, she was kidnapped by giants when she was young. She spent 25-odd years with them. Her family already thought she was dead and just did funeral rites for her, not knowing she was held captive by the giants. She was finally found in a garden on the northeast coast of the island, but something about her had changed. She was hysterical, foaming from the mouth, and most importantly, was pregnant, giving more questions than answers. According to the story, a giant had taken her as a wife, and I can't even begin to wrap my head around such a relationship. When the people saw her in the garden, they tried to get a hold of her or capture her, but her skin was so slimy that the men found it difficult to hold her in place. One of the men got an ingenious idea and got some rough leaves, which they used to hold her down and tie her up with a vine. She later gave birth to a mutation of a half-giant boy. The boy only lived to age 5 before being killed by one of the men for fear of history repeating itself. Mango herself died, but never regained her sanity. There were other similar stories of giant sightings on the island that Marius covered in his book, and the crazy thing is, we can't say it's purely a work of fiction, because once we say that, we indirectly say all works writing about giants are fiction too. And there are a lot of write-up about giants, even going all the way to the Bible. Aside from the Bible being a highly spiritual book, the Bible is also a historical account of events that transpired in history. In such, archaeologists sometimes use the Bible as a guide to dig up artifacts, treasures, and make discoveries of the old civilizations. That's how accurate the Bible is. Which is why 1 Samuel 17 verses 4 to 7 kind of carries weight in this topic. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath was described as a giant. His height, as the Bible recorded, was 6 cubits and a span, meaning he was 9 feet and 9 inches tall. His bronze helmet weighed 30 pounds, which was basically a bronze bucket. Now add a t-shirt that weighs about 150 pounds, which is like carrying someone on your chest while you walk. If the weight of that doesn't make you fall to the ground yet, it's time to add more in the form of a weapon. Now picture yourself carrying a huge metal spear that weighs about 30 pounds. Goliath also had a beautiful sword that David used to cut off his head. I would also like to think that the sword would be large and hefty. This wasn't a story, it was a record of an event that transpired between Israel and the Philistines. And one thing I like about the Bible is that it also points out other historical records for further reading, insinuating that some of the stories are the summarized version. And for a long time, people, including me, focused only on Goliath. His description alone was captivating, but what I failed to realize was that Goliath also had brothers who were giants. It's all in the Bible. In 2 Samuel 21 verses 16 to the end, it talks about not just one, but multiple giants involved in a war against Israel. All 4 came from the same country as Goliath and were fighting for the Philistines before meeting their demise. The first time giants were talked about in the Bible was in Genesis. Back then, they went by a different name, Nephilim. The Nephilim were a group of strange beings, or people who were unusually big and strong. They lived before and after the flood. They were the very first giants. This meant that there was an acknowledgement of giants as a race existing in the past, and if our theories are just a tad right, the Solomon Islands giants may be the last survivors of this species that ever roamed the earth. So, I've told you about the sightings, told you about the connections with other cultures all over the world, and told you to subscribe to our channel, and like this video as well. But what I haven't told you is a military account from soldiers who swore they fought giants in Solomon Islands and were lucky to be alive to tell the story. The Battle of Guadalcanal was a military campaign that took place from August 7, 1942 to February 9, 1943, on and around the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. This was during World War II. It was the first major land offensive by the Allies against the Empire of Japan. On August 7th, 1942, Allied forces, mostly U.S. Marines, landed on Guadalcanal, Tulagu, Florida Island, and the southern Solomon Islands, with the goal of using Guadalcanal and Tulagu as bases for a new campaign to eventually capture or neutralize Rabaul, which was the main Japanese base on New Britain, which was successful. Between August and November, the Japanese made several attempts to take back the island. Almost every day, there were 7 big naval fights and air battles that finally led up to the decisive naval battle of Guadalcanal in early November, where the last Japanese ships were sunk. The Japanese came up with a plan and tried to attack the island from the sea and land enough troops to take it back. But in December, they just gave up on retaking the land and evacuated their remaining forces by February 1943. Even the Allied troops were shocked and surprised. And here is where the story takes a strange turn. It turned out that the Japanese troops were fighting 2 different enemies at the same time. The Japanese troops who were stationed on these islands are said to have seen huge creatures, giants-like, that were 10 to 15 feet tall. Not only were these beings seen by the Japanese soldiers, but they also fought the giants. But their weapons had no effect against the giants. The Japanese troops lost more than half of their squad in that battle, with some of the soldiers carried away by the giants, while some hid. The encounters left an indelible mark on the troops, many of whom spoke of the difficulty in sleeping, as they were haunted by the echoes of their comrades' screams. And even if you don't believe this story, one thing is certain, and it's in the records. The Japanese, who are known for choosing death over defeat, abandoned a mission and went home. Of course, with every story, legend, folklore, and tale told, there are always those who tend to stay on the side of provided facts and evidence, which I have to admit is something this story struggles with. For example, the Japanese story sounds iffy, because to start with, the islands have been inhabited by people for at least 32,000 years. And not only that, in the 50s and 60s, the area was thoroughly mapped out in search of mineral resources. Remember that people believed the story of Mendanya, and these people and corporations took their time with their exploration and exploitation till they had more than enough before leaving. It's also possible that the Japanese fought the indigenous people, and they used jungle warfare and tactics to defeat the Japanese soldiers, just like with Vietnam. And unfortunately, some of these natives were cannibals, which would explain the eating of people. Which also brings me to the next point for critics, and I won't lie, they made a lot of sense with this theory, and it's as simple as saying they met a really tall person. Stay with me. Gigantism was an issue in the past, and due to a lack of medical innovation, a lot of people just kept growing. Gigantism, also called pediatric acromegaly and pituitary gigantism, is a very rare condition that happens when a child or adolescent has high levels of growth hormones in their body, which causes them to grow very tall, or worse, just keep growing nonstop. History has recorded a lot of individuals that are so tall that you could easily classify them as giants. Robert Wadlow, an American who is 8 feet 11 inches tall, is an example of this. Robert Wadlow was the tallest person who ever lived, and he never stopped growing until he died. While the tallest person who is still alive is a farmer from Turkey named Sultan Kosin. He is 8 feet 2 inches tall, which automatically makes him a Guinness World Record holder. He has the record for the world's biggest hand at an outstanding 27.5 centimeters, and the world's second biggest feet at 36.5 centimeters. He had to undergo medical surgery to stop growing because it affected the quality of his life. So again, imagine seeing Sultan Kosin coming right at you in a jungle. I personally would yell at the top of my voice shouting, "Giants! The giants are here." Honestly, I personally still marvel at the heights of basketballers. Those beings are too tall. I mean, look at these staggering differences. I don't know about you, but This certainly classifies as giant to me, and that could be what happened back then. Take a look at Gheorghe Muresan, who is 7 feet 7 inches tall, certainly in the next 200 years, and someone finds his grave with just his leg bone taller than half the population in the world. They would also think giants existed. And their being in the NBA proves that giants are athletic. They could run, easily drag you off to their hideout, and basically do what they want with you. And it didn't help matters that throughout history, there were a lot of con artists and liars who say they found giants, and even took pictures with the bones, only to find out that the bones are glued together to create that height or worse, photoshopped. One of the most well-known archaeological scams in American history was the Cardiff Giant. It was a 10-foot tall and about 3,000-pound petrified man that was found on October 16, 1869, by people digging a well behind the barn of William Newell's house in Cardiff, New York. After it was found, it soon became an attraction site. The belief became so widespread that President Abraham Lincoln referenced the lost race of giants along with extinct mastodons when describing the age of Niagara Falls. The crazy thing was that the person who planned the whole thing, George Hull, did it to prove a point that people can easily be deceived. Hull, who is an atheist, got into a fight with Reverend Turk and his followers at a Methodist revival meeting over Genesis 6, verses 4, which says that giants used to live on earth, and they were known as Nephilim, an offspring of an unholy union between angels and women. And the Reverend connected the sightings reported in the newspaper with the Bible, insinuating that the Bible events are real. Hull lost the case of proving that what was written in the papers was a lie. Hull was mad that he lost, so he wanted to show how easy it was for people to be tricked. In 1868, Hull and another man named H.B. Martin hired men to cut out a 10-foot 4.5-inch block of gypsum in Fort Dodge, Iowa. A lot of different acids and stains were used to make the giant look old and worn. In November 1868, Hull took the giant to his cousin William Newell's farm by train. He spent a total of $2,600 on the hoax, which is about $60,000 by today's standards. The giant was buried in a hole on Newell's farm one night in late November 1868. Nearly a year later, on October 16, 1869, Newell hired Gideon Emmons and Henry Nichols to dig a well, and that's when they found the giant. And he was right. People ate it up. In such, I'm pretty sure you've seen this image. One was so good that I actually believed it, but it was all a lie. Surprisingly enough, these images were not made to trick or fake anyone, but for a Photoshop contest. Some of them were made by the Weekly World News, a trashy newspaper that often puts out jokes and hoaxes for people to laugh at. But some people thought the pictures were real and shared them on the internet, and it just kept going on. This is why most skeptics don't believe in the giant story. How can you tell the difference between the real stories and the fake ones? Mind you, these lies have been in existence for a long time, full of mysteries and wonders that can't be explained. It would be stupid to think that the world is just as it seems. Even after telling this story, I can't help but feel like I have only just scratched the surface.